Just want to thank all of you guys for coming tonight. Thrilled to see such a great audience on a kind of chilly fall Monday evening. I'd like to start with John Strawbridge, who's with Lovely Lane, who can tell us a little bit about this amazing building that we're in, the history of the church.
Sure, welcome. It's a joy to have you and have this kind of event here at Lovely Lane. For those of you who may not be familiar, know our kind of catchphrase, we call ourselves the Mother Church of American Methodism. And it's because at our original building on what was then Lovely Lane, which is now Redwood Street, Methodism as a denomination was founded. It was part of the Church of England, and then there was this annoying little Revolutionary War, and it became less desirable to be part of the Church of England. So if you see a United Methodist Church really anywhere in the world, it began in Baltimore. It grew out of the Lovely Lane congregation. This building was built by Dr. Goucher as the Centennial Monument, the 100th anniversary of that founding event. And it was actually controversial in its time because it was built outside the city, and the congregation was very just unsure about being outside the city. But as you all know, and as we'll probably discuss, a city is a living thing. It tends to change, and the city has grown, and now we're almost in sort of the geographic center of the city. But we use this place, it's a National Register of Historic Places. We get tour groups that literally come from Korea, from Russia, from England, from all over. Just this past Sunday we had folks from Louisiana, from Texas, from Alabama. So it's nice to have a kind of a magnet, but it's even nicer to have been kind of a neighborhood church, to be a part of this Old Goucher community. When this church was built, there was only 100 members of the congregation. And so they had this audacity to build a 1,000-seat auditorium and say, we think this is going to happen. We think it's going to happen. We think people are going to come. And this neighborhood's been through, they came, and this building was filled. And then for a time, it wasn't when I was a kid. And now it's getting full again. And so it's great to see this kind of the lifeblood of the neighborhood and the pulse of the neighborhood and to be a part of that. So we are extremely grateful to be a part of this neighborhood and this heritage. We are extremely grateful to welcome you here tonight. And as proud as we are of our history, we're really excited about the future. So thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So thank you for that wonderful introduction to the church, John, and again for all of you all for coming out tonight. So my name is Kelly Cross. I'm president of the Old Goucher Community Association. I want to welcome you all here tonight, both to our neighborhood, for those of you all who are new to Baltimore, new to Old Goucher, as well as to the next in our Baltimore Futures speaker series. About 2 years ago, in this same room, we welcomed Pritzker Prize-winning architect Tom Main and Congress for the New Urbanism founder Elizabeth Platter-Zyberg to talk to us about how their seemingly contradictory visions of the urban form could come together in a city like Baltimore. And as many of you all may remember, sparks really flew that night. They had two very contradictory, sometimes, views on what we could do better here in the city. But I think that we all left with a much deeper understanding of how complex cities can be and how it's that very complexity that makes cities such interesting and vibrant places to call home. I expect fewer sparks tonight, but I do expect us to leave just as inspired, as educated, and as impassioned about making this the amazing city that we know it can be. So I've been listening to Chuck Marohn for over 4 years now. His thoughts on incrementalism, small-scale development, and resiliency have, more than few others, really shaped my views about how we should develop our own neighborhood, and in turn, how we should develop the city. And to introduce Chuck tonight, we have a Baltimore City Councilman who shares those same values. Councilman Leon Pinkett represents the 7th District, which includes much of West Baltimore, from the historic Black Harlem of Pennsylvania Avenue to the major corridor of North Avenue that links more neighborhoods than any other corridor in our city, to the streets that saw so much unrest, so much civil unrest after the death of Freddie Gray in 2015. Leon represents a truly vital part of the city. And he's also one of a new generation of city council members elected in 2016 who also understands that reconnecting our city is really integral to rebuilding it. So to that end, Leon worked with Baltimore to complete the Big Jump, the first real connection for pedestrians and cyclists over Interstate 83 between the neighborhoods of Druid Hill Park to the west and the neighborhoods of the Charles Village and Charles Street corridor to the east. So with that, I'll say I think that's the kind of project that we need for Baltimore. We need more projects like that at that scale and much more universal, ubiquitous around the city. So with that, I will turn it over to Leon Pinkett, who's going to introduce our featured speaker.
Thank you, Kelly, and to the Old Goucher Association. I couldn't think of a better venue to have this kind of discussion tonight, because literally the potential for Baltimore, the sky's the limit. Insert pun there. You know, despite the current challenges of our beloved Orioles, no one in here would be surprised that Baltimore is a baseball town. We live it, we eat it, we drink it, we sleep it. Baseball is in our DNA. And over the years, we've had an opportunity to celebrate so many great players that have played in Baltimore, from Cal Ripken to Eddie Murray to Brooks Robinson to Jim Palmer, you name them all. But alongside of them stands one of probably the greatest managers to ever manage in professional baseball, Earl Weaver. And Baltimore celebrated some of its best years under his leadership. And Earl Weaver coached under the philosophy of the three-run home run. It was his opinion that the best way, the most effective way to score was to get the home run. And he pretty much positioned his team and all of his tactics around, how do I set everything up for this one big swing? And while some might think that's an exciting approach to winning, you know, sending your team around players that have low batting averages but big impact, waiting for just that one swing, hoping that you could win the game, that's not the only way to score. And it's definitely not the only way to win. Some might say that a more effective way to win is to assemble a group of high batting average players that are really working together to manufacture runs. You know, in the context, some people will call that small ball, but there's a whole lot of people that won with small ball. And so it's, you know, while Earl Weaver's approach might have won him some games and might have had a measure of success on the baseball diamond, if you bring it into the world of community and economic development, it is a risky proposition to think that we're going to wait for the next big corporation, next big business, bank on the next big development, hoping for that one big swing that'll move our community, move our development, move our neighborhoods, move our city forward. Instead of, and all the while overlooking all of those singles and doubles that are in neighborhoods and communities throughout our city. And so as Baltimore moves in this period where we're looking at how we're going to strategize, what course we're going to look at as it relates to revitalizing our communities, we're dealing with issues from food access to transportation to affordable housing, you name it. It's in that spirit that I'd like to introduce to you tonight a sweet swinging infielder from Minnesota. Playing shortstop for the Minnesota Twins, I'd like to introduce to you tonight, Marohn.
I don't know if you know how big of a baseball fan I am, but that was beautiful. I grew up on a little farm in the center of Minnesota, a long way from here. And I never dreamed that I would start writing this blog and it would affect so many people that I would get an invitation to a place like this, such a beautiful place with such wonderful people. So thank you. I feel very honored to be here. I also, and I'll say this, as a kid growing up, we lived on this farm and we were distant away from any, we got like the two channels that everybody got, fuzzy on the screen. And my dad was kind of like an odd person. We had a lot of money. For some reason, he got this deal on one of those satellite dishes, but not the ones that you think of like today, the ones where it looks like you could contact Mars. You know, the huge ones that you'd have to go out and it's 30 below and you'd have to like move it to the other satellite. Back before, you know, they scrambled all those things and all that. We could not get the Minnesota Twins on that. It was not, but you know what baseball team we got? We got the Baltimore Orioles. And I grew up watching the Baltimore Orioles all the time. I was out here years ago and I took a trip to Camden Yards. And of course, our Camden Yards is the first ballpark of this new era. We built the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome. And we built it for baseball and for football. If you go there for a baseball game, you were looking at the 50-yard line, which the plate was over there. So you had to like sit like this the whole time. It was horrible for baseball. We built it, we were so proud of it, and then like 4 years later, you opened up Camden Yards. It was like, oh gosh, we should have just waited. But I came here and I went to a game, and it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. I love baseball. And I love, this building is gorgeous, and it's not just gorgeous because of the architecture, but it's gorgeous because of where it is and I think what it means. The talk I want to have tonight is about how we as governments, how we as people make our places better. And you know, there's a secular aspect to my talks. I've spoken in a few church settings over the years, but mostly speaking to community groups, and today I'm here in town because of the city managers conference. It was like 4,000, you know, big city bosses up the street who are going to go back and, you know, be the Robert Moses of their community. I'm trying to talk to them about doing things a little differently. It's great to be here because churches are one of those places where I think we can talk about community without feeling like we're going into some weird space, right? I deal with a lot of people who are comfortable with spreadsheets, but not comfortable with interpersonal relationships. So it's very warm and comforting to be here tonight. This whole presentation is about my little town. I live in a little city called Brainerd, Minnesota. If you've seen the movie Fargo, a couple nods. We don't talk like that, at least not when other people are around. But if you've seen that movie, you've seen a not so flattering but not so inaccurate portrayal of my little town. Little railroad town. My grandpa worked at the paper mill, that's closed. My uncles worked at the rail yard, that's closed. A little city that had about 14,000 people in 1945 and have about 14,000 people today. But it's my home. I grew up on a farm just outside of town that my great-great-grandparents homesteaded. And I had obviously lots of opportunity to leave. I left for college, I came back. I went to grad school, I came back. And I'm raising my kids there now. It is not at all like Baltimore. It's a very different place. But I think as we go, you'll see a lot of similarities, and hopefully there's a lot here for us to talk about. So here's my hometown. I said I'm from Brainerd. This is Brainerd right here. There's another city that shares a property line, or a city boundary line with Brainerd, and that's Baxter. These two, about 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis-St. Paul. Brainerd is the old railroad town. Baxter is the suburban highway strip. When I was as an undergrad, so I want to say it was like 93, 94, we built the bypass around town. Of course, that killed the downtown. All the big box stores grew up out here. Just for some reference, not that it matters a whole ton, but the farm I grew up on is right over here, so just a little bit off. I live now right here, in the center of town. I'm very involved in the community. I always have been. I am an engineer and a planner, so I tend to get a little involved in the technical side too. I'm one of those person who watches the council meetings on local access TV, reads the agendas, looks at the minutes. If there's a plan that's published or adopted, I will at least go through it and know the gist of what's going on. One day I woke up and on the front page of the paper was a story about how down at the legislature, our legislative delegation was asking for money to run sewer water from the edge of town out to the airport. This is absolutely something I would know about. It's not only what I did for years for a living, but you know, it's a pretty big deal. In our community, the cost that the legislature is asking is $7.1 million. Just for some context, our entire budget is $9 million. So this is in the size of our city, like a really huge amount of money. There was in the paper, the legislative delegation from Brainerd put forward a request in the House and in the Senate for money for this sewer and water project. What happens in the newspaper business is that for small towns, we don't have our own reporter. We have local reporters, but then all the small towns kind of get together and hire one person who's at the legislature, and they write for everybody. And then what happens is when something happens, you get a little brief, and then the next day, the local reporters kind of fill in. So this is a big deal for us. So the local reporters contacted our legislators and said, hey, you know, what's going on here? So the first thing they did was they called John Ward. Oh, I hate it when it does that. John is our House representative. He goes to my church. He's a really nice guy. They asked him, like, John, what's going on? And he said, look, I always listen to my constituents. I was told this is what you want. If this isn't what you want, let me know, and I can change it. Not a big deal. They then went to Carrie Rood. She's a former council member in a city that I used to work with, Republican, very nice lady. She's in the Senate. I like her a lot as well. They said, Carrie, what, do you have any comment? What's going on? And she said, you know, we've got a process here. There's deadlines. If we don't get our stuff in, we can't come back later and ask for it. So let's just get this moving. We'll have a conversation. We can always pull it back, but let's get the ball rolling. There are a lot of people, including myself, are going, what does this mean? Like, I still have this question of like, why this project? Why are you putting forward this money for this project? Finally, City Hall issued a press release, which you think in a town our size, it wouldn't be necessary, but that's how they did things. The press release said, the fire marshal is requiring us to do this. So I'll give you just a little bit of background on where that came about. A few years prior to this, we had gotten a grant from the federal government to make some improvements to our airport. Understand that our airport has 2 flights a day, one in the morning, one late at night. I fly probably more than anyone in my city. I never fly out of our airport. We got money to build a conference room, a restaurant, and a jet bridge. Don't ask me what we're doing with a restaurant. Yeah, I don't know anyone who goes to the restaurant out there, but we have a restaurant. And now we have a jet bridge. I don't really like it. I kind of liked, I'll say this to you, you guys get a little bit of winter here, but not what we get. There's something kind of, manly is not the word because it's not a gender thing. There's something like native, you know, like Minnesotan, when you land in the airplane and then you walk down the jet bridge onto the tarmac when it's 25 below. And, you know, you don't have your jacket on, you don't have your hat and gloves on. You're just like, I'm here, I'm from Minnesota. And you look around and you see, you know, all the people who are not. Yeah. And you kind of, you get this feeling of like, you know, this is my place. They took that away from us. So now we have the jet bridge that comes out and we all, you know, we're weak people now. We all walk in climate-controlled comfort through the half a terminal that we have. The fire marshal said, these improvements now, you need more fire protection capacity. I know what this means. I'm a licensed engineer. This means you just put a little bit of a holding tank out there so that if something catches on fire, you can drop a hose in there and pull out of it. No, that's not what it meant to City Hall. So we've got this $7.1 million project. I go around and I start talking to people, because that's what I do. I'm at the coffee shop, I'm getting my hair cut, I'm, downtown, whatever, I start talking to people. And the talk on the street, you can just hear it, right? People saying, well, Chuck, you can't be against this. It's going to create jobs. We need jobs. We have the highest unemployment in the state. How can you be against this? We need those jobs. Chuck, it's not going to cost us anything. The legislature is giving us this money. If we don't take it, someone else is going to get it. Why would we not use it? Chuck, think of all the development potential that's going to come along with this. We're running this new pipe out there, all this land we can now develop and build on. Wouldn't this be great? And then Chuck, think of the children. The fire marshal said we have to do this. Are you really going to stand up and say we don't? Because that blood's going to be on your hands, right? So the coffee shop talk goes around, this project. What happens at the legislature, we all understand. Do they approve the money? Yes. They don't approve all of it, though, right? That would be really dumb politics. So what they do is they approve just enough to where our portion is going to hurt, right? If you want this, you're going to have some skin in the game. So now we're going to have to pitch in our portion. This becomes like a local conversation now. People showing up at the council, should we do this, should we not? Council, are you going to go forward or not? Of course, at that point, all the local contractors and engineers, all the non-governmental organizations line up. They send their letters of support into the paper. They let their opinion be known. We can't back out on our legislative delegation now. They went to the mat for us. How can we turn this money down? We got to do the responsible thing. This is going to be good for growth and jobs. And come on, people, let's do it. And we end up at the end of the day with a project. I have worked on so many public projects in cities big and small. And this is how they're developed. This is how they come about. What is missing from this? What's missing from this that's in this room? People. Right, people, humans, residents, people that live in a city, in a neighborhood. We got a process for you, though, because we become very good as professionals of handling people, right, in this process. So what we do, once we're here at this point, we go to you and we say, guess what? We've got 3 different options, right? You can take your pick, which one you want. Option number 1, we will put a gold-plated pipe out to the airport. It will cost $1 gazillion. Option number 2, we will do nothing and get fined by the Pollution Control Agency. And option number 3 is this nice kind of moderate approach, we're between the two where, oh, by the way, it's 80% funded by the state. Which one would you like? And we wonder why people get angry, right? We wonder why people feel like they're not listened to. We wonder why people think that this system is not working for us. I've spent a lot of my energy the last decade trying to understand how we build places that are financially strong and resilient. We're going to get into this a little bit, but I've come to appreciate the notion that as insiders to a process, this is incredibly dysfunctional. And even when we, and I'm saying we as in engineers, planners, professionals, people who advise cities, even when we have the best of intentions, it's hard for this process not to become very self-serving. If we want to build places that are truly successful financially, successful for people, we need to take this process and turn it on its head and start from a very different place. That's what I want to talk about tonight. Where do we start? Where do we start to identify the best investments in our communities? There's a saying from Silicon Valley that goes like this. Innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb. While innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. Everybody in this room prefers smart to dumb. But we have an overwhelming preference, especially the more affluent we become. We have an overwhelming preference for order over chaos. we will tolerate a bizarre amount of dumb in order to not have chaos. And if you doubt me, think of the last time you sat at a traffic signal at 1 in the morning, right? Our commitment to order is so strong that we will tolerate a world of dumb. Let me show you what this looks like from a city standpoint. This is one of my favorite cities in the country. This is Memphis, Tennessee. If you have not been to Memphis, I encourage you to go. Memphis is a place full of energy. It just exudes energy. It's one of, in planning world, we like to talk about social capital being kind of a way to equate financial capital with the capital that you get when you work together and have communities of people. Memphis just is like overflowing with social capital. It's one of the most exciting places I've ever been. But Memphis struggles a lot. Memphis has had decades and decades of really bad public investments. When you see the lists that you don't want to be on as a city, the poverty rate, the unemployment rate, the homicide rate, Memphis and Detroit are often 1, 2, 2, 1 on those lists, kind of interchangeable. Memphis struggles a lot. At some point in the past, Memphis leadership decided that what they needed to make the city really successful was an NBA basketball team playing in a pyramid-shaped stadium down on the Mississippi River. So they went out and they built a stadium and they went looking for a team. They were able to land a team. Those of you that follow basketball, professional basketball, may know they got the Vancouver Grizzlies to move to Memphis. So now we have the Memphis Grizzlies. The problem is when the Grizzlies came to town, they didn't like the stadium. So the city wound up building them a new one a few blocks away from here. This one sat empty for a decade and a half. Orderly but dumb. Let me show you chaotic but smart. This is a little street in Memphis called Broad Avenue. Broad Avenue is a former streetcar stop. I know you. When did you sneak in? It's nice to see you. Thanks for being here. Broad Avenue is a little streetcar stop. Back in the 1950s, the city ran a highway through the middle of this neighborhood. They ripped out the streetcar lines. Without the neighborhood foot traffic, without the streetcar traffic, these businesses just died. Some neighbors, fed up with the decline, fed up with the neglect, went out, took matters into their own hands. They worked with the property owners to get those stores swept out. They swept up the sidewalks. They painted their own bike lanes. They painted their own crosswalks. They went out and they asked businesses from around the community to come in and open up just for one weekend to show people what was possible. They got a couple art galleries. They got a bike repair shop. They got a couple little food places to come in and open up. They didn't go get city permission. They didn't get Department of Health inspections. They started on a Friday. They ended on a Sunday. They figured by the time someone comes out to shut us down, we're gonna be gone anyway. Let's just go do it. Chaotic but smart. The pyramid. Many of you may know this, but if you don't, the city was able to find a use for the pyramid. They converted it into the world's biggest Bass Pro Shop. It took over $200 million in public subsidies to do this. The first year, they were at 50% of their revenue projection. The second year, they were only at 40% of their revenue projection. It's a tragedy that like keeps on giving, you know? It's really sad. That Broad Avenue project, I've got the numbers in my head, but I'm gonna read them here so you can get it. $15 million in private investment subsequent to this. A 50% increase in rents, 25 new businesses, 29 properties built or renovated, and 17 properties that were on the blighted list that have been taken off. Total public investment Yeah, 0. Chaotic but smart. I heard someone say, wow, and I'm glad you said that. I think it's important to understand what we tried to do after World War II and where that has brought us to. After World War II, we made this decision, and I think we can look back at it and we can say, these were people who were trying to do good things, if we want to be generous, and I think there's no reason not to be. You have a generation that survived the Depression, survived World War II, had struggled with the difficulties of cities, because cities are difficult places to live sometimes. We have to live next to people. We have to work out conflict. It's tough sometimes. And they said, we can solve all these problems by spreading everybody out. We can solve all these problems by spreading everybody out. When you say, wow, what you're reacting to, in my mind, is I think something that is obvious to people when they start to look at it. And that is that the act of spreading things out is really an act of dissipating energy over a broad area. And when you start to go the other way, and agglomerate is the technical economic development term, but when you start to bring people together and create pockets of energy, this kind of stuff is what results. And I'm going to show you this in ways that I think will give you even more wows. Cities do not develop the way that we built them after World War II. Historically, we see a pattern of development for thousands and thousands of years, kind of this time-tested wisdom that was passed down and received from cities all over the world. We can go back thousands of years to ancient cities, the earliest cities that we can excavate, and we see very similar patterns of growth and development. Things started very small, and they worked their way up in an iterative, incremental kind of fashion. This is my hometown back in 1870. You can see these little pop-up shacks, some hopes and some dreams about what could possibly be in the future. Over 30 years, these little shacks would be torn down or added onto and changed, and this exact same street would look like this. And after another 40 years of incremental development of city building iteratively over this broad area over a long period of time, slowly growing in dimensions up, dimensions out, and in intensity, these 2- and 3-story wood structures would become buildings of brick and granite. When we look at some of the old historic neighborhoods in our communities, even though this was on the edge of town when it was built, and I love that story, I thank you for it. That was a great way to think about this. What we saw is that cities would grow incrementally out, but at the same time, they were becoming incrementally more intense. It's a pattern of development that not only do we see around the world, but has a lot of like internal support mechanisms to it. And let me just explain one, because I find I've been working on this one lately in my mind, so I'm going to try it out on you, because I think this is such an important concept. If you go to Econ 101, supply and demand, if demand stays the same and you increase supply, what happens to price? Price goes down. If you have a lot of something, the price is less. If you have less of something and the same demand, price goes up. This is like your first day of economics. If we look at cities, one of the things that happened in traditional cities as they would grow incrementally is that each increment made the land underneath it more valuable. So if you look at this little spot here, how valuable is the land underneath here? Not very valuable at all, right? This was just like some speculative bets on a railroad stop in the middle of nowhere. You can think of the first rendition of Baltimore. The first people that were ever here, they put up little shacks just like this, and this place was not worth that much. But there was a lot of hopes and dreams about what it could be, right? As the next iteration grew, these buildings were replaced with these buildings. And that land underneath it was worth a lot more now, right? Because there's stuff going on there. There's people, there's commerce, there's buildings. But what about the edge of town? What did the edge of town look like? Look like that. The land out there was really cheap. If you were a poor person, if you were an upstart family, you could go get land out on the edge. And what you were hoping for is that over time, the city would grow and your stuff would become wealthier. You could build wealth in your neighborhood by working at it over time. And of course, as things progress further, the buildings will become more and more permanent. This sounds like wonderful, and it's an amazing concept for creating wealth out of nothing. If you are a poor person, there's a place for you in a community to buy into at the price point you have, and then benefit over time as things prosper. It's egalitarian in a sense. What was the tyranny of this? Because there's a horrible, oppressive tyranny of this. It's that once you get to this, this is a really expensive thing. This is really expensive property in relationship to the others of the community. It becomes like there's a point in time where you reach where it's like, here's the people with money, here's the people without money, and you've got a phase shift to get to the point where this goes up. The tyranny becomes in that, like, the big banker and the connected people own all the wealth. How do we get rid of that? Go back to supply and demand. When you run a highway through the middle of town and you open up all this land out on the edge, what do? You massively increase the supply of accessible land. And so in a sense, what we did is we made land cheap for everybody. Cheap being a relative term, we made it cheap. But what happened to the wealth that we built in the communities? We destroyed it. Absolutely destroyed it. And that's why from an economic standpoint, when we look at cities like Baltimore, like Philadelphia, that suffered just brutally after World War II, what our national policy was to wipe out the wealth in your neighborhoods, to destroy it. That's what we did. And there's this tension there, because on one hand, this is really rough, because, this is really expensive land, and it's not, I'm trying to explain this in the way I would explain it to my dad. These are not, when you get to this point, it's not a dynamic ecosystem the way this is. You can't, there's no entry-level spot here. But on the other hand, when you destroy the value, when you destroy the wealth, all of it goes the other way. And let me show you that. Let me show you what that looks like. These are two identical blocks in my hometown. The one on the left I've labeled old and blighted. The one on the right I've labeled shiny and new. If you look at these, you'll see that they're the same size, the same area, they have the same amount of public infrastructure. Everything about these is the same except for the style of development. That old and blighted block looks like this. Again, you notice the pop-up shacks look very similar to that 1870s. This was the first iteration of development. Back in the 1920s, as my city was growing, the far edge of town was these three blocks. This was the way edge of town. These is a little pop-up shack, some hopes and some dreams. The people who built these were hoping that the city would continue to grow. If that had happened, you would have eventually been able to justify second and third stories. The buildings become more intense, more ornate. There would have been more wealth there. That's not what happened. What happened was these were built, then we had the Depression, then we had World War II, then we had a development pattern that just skipped right over this and started building out on the edge. These properties, the value dropped, and they've stagnated for 90 years. 2 blocks over, it used to look just like this. The city got it torn down, and now we have the new taco drive-thru. This is how it looked yesterday. Just kidding. We don't have snow yet. We won't get snow for another 2 or 3 weeks. Not yet. It does get in the 30s at night, though. It has a few times. We won't get snow till second week in November. Everybody was thrilled about this, right? We got rid of blight. We've got this new thing. It meets all of our zoning codes, all of our regulations. You know, the traffic can flow more smoothly because we got rid of the on-street parking. It meets all the check boxes of what we're trying to do. What nobody bothered to look at is this. This old blighted rundown block has a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny new one, the same size area, the same amount of public infrastructure, only worth $600,000. The city's actually collecting 78% more taxes from that old rundown junky block than that shiny new one. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional pattern of development. The way we historically built cities around the world for thousands and thousands of years. You're looking at that pattern in its infant phase after generations of neglect, and it still outperforms by a wide margin the stuff we're building brand new today. This is the city of Lafayette, Louisiana. I'm gonna take a moment here to explain to you what we're looking at, and then we're gonna walk through it. We have a big enough room here where there's a few people who are red-green colorblind. So I'll walk through this one really slowly because this map is not making as much sense to you as it might to other people. We deal with accounting terms. So if you're in the red, you're losing money. If you're in the green, you're making money. What this is a profit and loss map for the city of Lafayette, Louisiana. I was invited along with a couple friends of mine to go to Lafayette, Louisiana and help them understand why they were broke. They have huge backlogs of maintenance. They could quadruple their road budget, for example, and not catch up. People were pushing them to do all kinds of things, make huge cuts in their budget, do huge tax increases, borrow a bunch of money. And they said, we can't even explain what's going on. And so we went in, and Joe Minicozy, he's a brilliant team at Urban 3. They do great mapping. We looked at every single expense that the city had, from police protection and fire protection to transit service to sewer and water and road maintenance, and we mapped them all out. And then we looked at every single source of revenue the city had, property tax, city tax, utility fees, what have you, and we mapped those out. All different maps. We had like 3 dozen different maps. And at the end, we mashed these all together into one profit and loss statement. Here's all your sources of revenue, here's all your expenses, here's what they look like mashed together. So for those of you that do see red and green clearly, what you are seeing here where you see green is a parcel that pays more to the city in taxes than they require in ongoing service and maintenance. Where you see red, you're seeing the opposite. This is one that we're losing money on. The cost of providing service and maintenance is more than what we're bringing in revenue. And the higher the box goes, the more the disparity is. So let me walk you through this. Right here, this is green. This is in the center of the map. This is all green. That is Lafayette's core downtown. I don't know how many of you have been to Lafayette, Louisiana. Let me just assure you, nobody goes to Lafayette, Louisiana, goes downtown to take photos, okay? You might go downtown to go to a dive Zydeco bar, which is kind of cool. You might go down to get a taco for $1.50. But nobody goes to Lafayette to be like, I'm gonna immerse myself in a great downtown. It is not. Financially, it's doing fantastic, doing wonderful. I hope the contrast is good enough on here, but let me walk through. There's a crescent of green that runs from about here down over to here. It's all green right through here. Those are the poor neighborhoods in Lafayette, Louisiana. So where all the poor people live. When we went to Lafayette, Louisiana, and we were going to get an Airbnb for a week and stay there and work, the city staff said, don't go to those neighborhoods there. That's where the homicides happen. That's where the burglaries happen. Like, stay out of there. Financially, they're doing fantastic. In other ways, really, really struggling. The rest of this map is red. All this stuff over here, all this stuff up here, all this out here, all this is red. Those are your big box stores, your franchise restaurants, your strip malls, those windy, cul-de-sac-y subdivisions with the single-family homes. That's what all that is up there. This map points out two subsidies that are ubiquitous in the American development pattern. We see this in every city we've ever modeled. We see these two things. One, poor neighborhoods subsidize affluent neighborhoods. I sat down with the mayor, A.C. Wharton, in the city of Memphis. We showed him this in Memphis. There's a guy from South Memphis. Really, has a huge passion and affinity for South Memphis. And South Memphis is a dirt poor neighborhood. It is a viable business in South Memphis to, if you have a car, drive to Walmart, fill it up with essentials, toilet paper, toothpaste, what have you, come back and sell it out the back of your car. That's a viable business because there just is no other place to buy that in this neighborhood. This is a dirt poor neighborhood. We showed the mayor how those neighborhoods per acre are paying more in taxes than the wealthy gated community out on the edge of town. And that is over and over and over in city after city after city. The second subsidy is that future generations subsidize today's generation. In Lafayette, Louisiana, the median family pays $1,500 in taxes a year to the city. They pay other taxes to the school district and the parish and what have you, but $1,500 in taxes to the city. In order for the city to make good on every promise they've made, taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. 1 out of every $5 a median family makes would need to go back to the city just to maintain roads, maintain sewers, fix sidewalks, keep the street lights on, provide police and fire protection. And they don't have any crazy pension issues, by the way. That's not going to happen. That's never, ever going to happen. And so at some point, and it's already, they're dealing with this a little bit, the city of Lafayette is going to have to make a decision on what neighborhoods they keep and what neighborhoods they let go away. What roads they decide to fix, what roads they don't. What pipe they repair and what pipe they just say, sorry, you don't have water service over here anymore. Is there a city in this country that this sounds like? Usually, when I ask that question, it doesn't hit that close to home. Usually when I ask this question, people will say Detroit. Sounds a lot like Detroit.
Flint.
Sounds a lot like Flint. I'm gonna give you a narrative of Detroit. The narrative that I am comfortable with. Because when I go around the country and I talk to people, everybody has their own narrative to explain what's happened in Detroit. And the one common theme among all those narratives is we're not Detroit. Like, it's bad. Whatever is wrong with them, like, we're not that. Okay? In the early 1900s, as Detroit was becoming the auto city, they became the first ones to experiment with the American pattern of development. They were the first ones to run the highways through the middle of the neighborhoods. They were the first ones to knock down homes for parking lots. They were the first city to create a commuter culture where people would live on the outskirts of town and drive in, work, drive home at the end of the day. They were the first ones to do this. They were the first ones to create all these expenses to allow people to spread out. And when we hit the Great Depression, and cities around the country started to implode and really struggle, default. I mean, cities, we had a huge number of bankruptcies, municipal bankruptcies in the Great Depression. One city, and it was a handful of cities, someone mentioned Flint and there were other ones, one city really stood out as having figured it out. One city continued to grow, continued to add jobs, continued to have prosperity. That was Detroit. And when we got done with the Depression and World War II, and we looked around and said, we just defeated the worst evil we had ever seen. We had come together as a country. We can do great things. What's the great thing we should do? We should look at our most successful city and copy them everywhere. And that's what we did. We set out to build Detroit everywhere. Detroit's not some like crazy, weird place. They're just a couple decades ahead of everybody else, right? The problems that we're experiencing here, the problems that other cities are experiencing, are just an echo of things that we've already seen take place. When you denude a city, when you take the energy of a place and you spread it out over a huge area, just from an engineering finance standpoint, you create enormous expense and very little wealth to go along with it. We can't do that. So how do we start to fix this? And this gets back to our project development question. Local governments, which really, when I say local government, what I think of in my mind, different than a state government and a federal government, which seem very distant to me. When I say a local government, what I'm really talking about is the collection of us. The collection of us. What is a collection of us? What do we do? I think we need to embody two competing kind of financial mindsets in our actions and where we put our public money. The first one is the mindset of a banker. And I'm going to contrast that with the mindset of a venture capitalist. Because they're two like very different mindsets, and I think we need to have a little bit of both. A banker mindset is a very, very conservative mindset. Bankers do not lose money. There's a saying in the banking business that you operate by the 363 principle. You borrow money at 3%, you loan it out at 6%, you get out on the golf course by 3 p.m. That, if you're a banker, that's how you operate. And the idea is, if you want money from a bank, you have to have collateral, you have to have equity. If you really desperately need a loan, you can't get one. The only people that can really get a loan are the people who could live without it, right? That's a banker mentality. A venture capital mentality is way different than that. A venture capital mentality is not ultra-conservative. It's more tactical. It looks and it says, I'm going to take some of my money, not money I need for food and not money I need to live on, but I'm going to take some of my money and I'm going to put that into things that have a really high upside potential. The problem is they're so kind of risky and out there that I don't know which one's going to be successful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invest in maybe a dozen different companies. And I know that 3 or 4 of those are going to go totally bust and I'll lose everything I put into them. And 3 or 4 of them will do okay and maybe break even and maybe I'll make a little bit. But a handful of those, maybe 2, 3, are going to be so successful that it will make up not only for all my losses, but it'll give me a whole bunch of wealth to go with it. That's a venture capital mentality. Most of us, if we have savings or investments or 401k through work or what have you, we've had to walk through this process where they ask us our penchant for risk. You want to take your savings and do you want to put it all under the mattress or do you want to go to the casino? And you're like, well, medium. Do you want to go roll dice with it or do you want to bury it in the backyard? Well, medium. And everything invites us in the investment world, us like average people, for an answer of medium. Yet if you study Wall Street investment, what you see is that Wall Street investors tend to use a strategy called the barbell strategy. Nothing about this is medium. Medium is for suckers. What they do is they say, we're going to take most of our wealth, and we're going to put it into things that are guaranteed not to lose money. We're going to put it in things that don't have very high payout, but they're not going to, I'm not going to lose, okay? A banker mentality. Then they put a little bit of their money into things in the venture capital mentality. Things that you could lose it all, but you also could see huge upside. What this approach allows you to do is to minimize your downside risk. There's a floor that you're not going to go below here, right? While also capturing a lot of upside potential. This is a really savvy way to invest your money. Now let's switch back to public investments, a city. If we wanted to do the barbell strategy as a city, where's our banker investments? Let's go back to Lafayette. Where's our banker investments?
Green Crescent.
Yeah, it's the core downtown and these poor neighborhoods. They're already profitable. You're already making money there. Those neighborhoods should never want for a streetlight being out, or a sidewalk broken, or you know, potholes in the street. They should never want for basic maintenance. Why? Because they're already paying the freight. They're already profitable. You're already, like, you from an investment standpoint, you would be crazy to not take care of these places. They're already your solid investment. There's your banker investment right there. Where's your venture capital investment? And this is what I want to go through right now. So when I published that thing about the taco place, that old and blighted block versus a taco place, and remember, I come from a very small town. People got really angry with me. Yeah, my cousin is the head of the Economic Development Authority, who set up that deal. I have another cousin that's a manager at the Taco John's. Yeah. So, yeah, family reunions are awkward places. So the feedback that I got was, okay, Mr. Smarty Pants, what would you have done differently? You know, you think you're so smart. You think we shouldn't have done this. What would you have done differently? And then it was, would you have said no to Taco John's? You laugh. Here's the thing. I realized that I would say no to Taco John's, but nobody else in my community would. So that's not really a viable answer. So I thought about this a long time because I struggled with it. I didn't have a way to deal with this. And what I started to realize after a while is that the idea of the old and blighted block being replaced by the shiny and new taco place, the problem there was not that transition. The problem there was that the block was old and blighted to begin with. It was the blight and the decline that I really had a problem with and needed to not accept. And so I started to ask questions like, if we wanted to reverse this, what would we do? And of course, there's all kinds of standard economic development approaches to do this. The planning profession has like a whole bunch of things. Engineers have a whole bunch of things. Let's go out and put in a new streetscape. Let's go out and put in a bunch of decorative lights. Let's go out and, you know, I don't know, build a pyramid-shaped stadium and hope it all goes well, right? There's a playbook for this. And I said, without that playbook, because that playbook is broken, what would we do? And what I recognize is that I didn't know. And I wouldn't know unless I spent time there in that neighborhood trying to understand where the actual problems were. So I'm going to give you some orientation. Here's the old and blighted block, and here's the Taco John's. My office is in the rail yard right here. So this is the old rail yard. The railroad's not there, so the buildings are all abandoned. They rehabbed one, and I have an office there now, looking out at these two blocks. This is the neighborhood school. My mom went there, I went there, my kids went there. I live in the next neighborhood over, so right about right here. So my walk to work is this way. What I started to do is come this way. Bike through this neighborhood, walk through this neighborhood. Some of my friends who likewise live in here, but also over here, we would do the same thing. And we just dedicate ourselves for a whole year to trying to understand where people struggled in this neighborhood. We would go out and just walk and run into people and say, can I walk with you? We would go out and we set up a desk, like just a table in a parking spot on the street. We just worked there all day, talked to people when they went by. We just went out and biked and like looked at things, looked at what was going on. Over the course of the year, we saw things like the mom walking through the ditch, weeds up to her waist, pushing a stroller. What are you doing? Well, I don't have a car today. I have to get to the grocery store. The streets is not safe, so I'm walking here. The elderly woman walking with the walker, climbing over mounds of snow in the middle of the street. Why are you walking in the middle of the street? I have to get to the pharmacy. I don't have a choice. I can't wait till tomorrow. There's no sidewalk here, so I'm walking in the only place I can. Kids walking through the alley, going around mud puddles. What are you guys doing? We're walking to school. Well, why don't you walk out there where our mom told us not to? She told us to walk in the alley where it's safer. The cars drive too fast out there. So we started to put these things together. And over the course of a year, we tried out different things. Like we went out and we, I'll show you some of these. We striped some streets and did some other things without permission. We're just trying out stuff to see how things would react. And at the end, we had a block party. We had a scavenger hunt. We did little things to get people out and get people talking. And after a year, we put together this list of 8 projects that the city could do to address the decline and reverse the decline in this neighborhood. I'm going to go through those now with you. And again, just for orientation, this is kind of like the east-west street through the neighborhood, the north-south street, the kind of main thoroughfare. There's a park up here. This is the old mall. It's now got a grocery store and then a bunch of offices. I say old mall. There's the new mall. The old mall is where I sat on Santa's lap. The new mall is where my kids sat on Santa's lap. Both of them are now closed, so I don't know where my grandkids will sit on Santa's lap. I'll have to figure that one out. They might not do that at that point, I guess. So let me walk you through what these 8 projects are. Here's project number 1. This is the east-west street. This is the one where the kids wouldn't walk because their mom told them not to. The cars do drive really, really fast down here. You can see there's no pavement markings, so what it winds up is like you got 2 22-foot wide lanes. Just from an automobile driver behavior, when there's no edge friction, when you have wide open spaces, even the best intentioned of us will drive fast. When you feel safe and comfortable, you tend to drive faster. When you don't feel comfortable, you drive slower. These wide open spaces say to the driver, there's nothing to worry about here, so people drive very fast. We did a speed study. We found that 2 out of 3 cars were going over 30 miles an hour, which once you go over 20 miles an hour, if you hit someone, they're dead. So these are really unsafe speeds. We went out in the middle of the night, actually like 5 in the morning, and we took the machine that you would stripe a baseline path in a softball field. And we striped in narrower lanes. We just striped in the lanes. And then we went out and we did a speed study again. And in the same 2-hour period, we found that only 1 car out of almost 300 went over 30 miles an hour. We slowed speeds dramatically by adding in that edge friction. So what we said with our project is, let's go in and put that in permanently. First rain, all of our striping went away. We go in there with some paint and just put in some markings, slow things down. Perpendicular to that is this street. Sometimes people get excited when I give this presentation because they think we have light rail. No, we have an abandoned rail line out to our old paper mill. They don't have an icon for abandoned rail line, so that's what you get. Again, you can see this is just 2 really wide drag strips. There's no sidewalks here at all. That old and blighted block is at the very end here. So what happens is that anybody who's walking out here is kind of in the middle of just a speed derby, right? And nobody walks. And because nobody walks, that old and blighted block really suffers. Because as soon as you get in your car, you're not going to go to the junky store up there. You're going to drive half a mile up the road and go to the Starbucks or whatever, right? So this design we know was forcing people on this side into their cars. And we said, let's create just some space for them. Let's do the same thing with some paint. Let's bring out the lanes. Let's tighten it up. Let's bring the parking out. And then let's create space on the edge with the parking as a separation so that people can walk safely up and down there. A lot of the people in the neighborhood that we ran into them going to the grocery store and back. There's two areas that this neighborhood tended to funnel through to get to the grocery store. Both of them were encumbered by this fast cross traffic that would come through here. This first one, when we looked at it and we saw what they had done at the grocery store to slow down traffic, we said we can do the same thing here, a little bit of cross hatching in this intersection, just to let people know when they're driving through that, hey, slow down, be aware, people. South of there, there's another crossing. This one didn't really work well with the cross hatching, but we did go out with duct tape and put in crosswalk. And we put up some flags for people to carry when they were walking across. Not the ideal solution, but when you don't have any money to do anything, it's like better than just good luck. We interviewed people when they did this. We would sit there and talk to them, and they said, yes, this helps, this makes things better. Once they cross then, you're on this stretch where this is our commercial street section. It's designed for on-street parking. There's all this off-street parking, so no one ever, this is not used for parking. So it's become like two 25-foot lanes. It's just huge. This radius is really big, so cars that come flying around this corner. We actually saw people standing there walking who would dive into the snowbank to avoid the cars. We said, let's just take and put a double white line on the northern 10 feet of this street and give people just a little bit of safe space to walk. Just give them a little bit of a refuge, a little bit of a place where they can get, from the neighborhood over to the grocery store. On the north side of the neighborhood, this is our park. This is what it looks like from the houses that face the park. The police were getting all kinds of complaints about nefarious activity, drugs and other things going on here. They wanted to do extra enforcement, put out cameras. Our suggestion was, let's trim the trees. What we have found, and what I think other communities have found, is that neighborhood policing works really well when there's kind of a passive police. When people, their homes face the street, there's windows in the front, and you can actually see into the park, see into these public spaces. So we said, let's just make this a little bit more visible. Once you get on the other side, you'll see that the park is pretty neglected. We do have the ball fields, but a bunch of weeds, no trees, nothing mowed. There's a lot of kids that live in this neighborhood. They go play at the school. In the year that we spent out here, we never saw any kids playing in this park, ever. The only time there were kids here is when there was an organized evening activity. So we said, we can't fix this overnight. We don't have a lot of money. So let's go out here and do what we can now. Let's get some trees planted and get a little bit of a forest going. Put some seedlings in out here so that we get a buffer to this, failed industrial site. And then let's just plant some trees, here so we can someday watch a ball game in the shade. Let's plant a couple maple trees or whatever, and it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, but at some point in the future, someone's going to be able to enjoy the fruits of that. Let's get that started today. Our last project then was along this street here. This was the north-south street that went right past the front of the school. This street, of all the streets in this neighborhood, seemed to us to have the best potential for kind of being the epicenter of a renaissance. The buildings along this street all face the street real nicely. They opened up onto the street. They were kind of like a community feel to it. There was a good boulevard. The street itself was kind of narrow, so that the traffic tended to flow a little slowly. There was one thing kind of missing on this street. In the 80s, Dutch elm disease came through and wiped out a whole bunch of our street trees. About half the trees or more on this street were taken down. You can see on the one side they're there, and on the other side they're absent. We know that when you have street trees, it improves the value of the property. It also improves the quality of life for people there. They provide shade, they're aesthetically very nice, and they improve your property values. Houses with trees in front of them sell for higher than houses that don't. So we said, again, we're not going to go plant full-grown trees, but we can make an investment in our future now. Let's go out, and we counted 75 missing trees along the street. Let's just go out and get them planted now. So there's our 8 projects. 8 projects that we identified from the needs of people in the neighborhood. By going out and observing with a level of humility where people struggle. And then asking the question, not how do we solve every problem, how do we fix everything, but asking the question, with the limited resources we have right now, how can we make this better right now? Not after a committee, not after studies, what can we do with what we have right now to address this in some way? My city finished that sewer and water project. The one out to the airport that I started with. It was $7.1 million was the estimate. The legislature gave us 80% of that. We had to come up with the rest. Then, of course, we were responsible for the project administration and everything else that would come. They finalized that contract last spring, so it was completed. They made the last payment. The final cost was $13.5 million. All of that overrun was money that we were forced to borrow, and now we'll be paying back for decades on our sewer and water bills. People who can't afford that, quite frankly, will be paying for it for a long time. Here's the cost of our 8 projects.
Wait. Why is it every time that we hear about a government contract and they agree at a certain figure,
Say that.
then all of a sudden...
Say that for 3 minutes from now.
Okay.
So here's our projects. $16,700. What happens if we go out and we spend $16,700 in this neighborhood trying to reverse decline, trying to change that trajectory from this to this? What if we do that and nothing happens? What if we go out and spend $16,700 and nothing is any better? Nobody says, wow, this neighborhood is going in the right direction. I think I will paint my house, or fix my roof, or patch that window, or put an addition on. Nobody says, hey, this neighborhood is going in the right direction. I think I'm going to buy that rundown house and fix it up. What if we spend $16,700 trying to address the needs of people there, and nobody's life, nothing changes in the neighborhood at all? What then? Well, we're out $16,700. Like, we can afford that. That's venture capital money. That's easy, right? Like, we can lose that. We will have gained knowledge, though, right? Of 8 things that don't work. And next year we'll go try 8 other things. But I am convinced that if we humble ourselves to go out and observe where people struggle, and then ask the question, what can we do right now with what we have to address that struggle? And we do that day after day, week after week, year after year, in neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood. Yes, it's hard work. Yes, it's not efficient. But I am convinced that we will be making the highest returning investments that we can possibly make. And we cannot help but make people's lives better as we do it. Jane Jacobs said, cities have the capability of providing something for everyone, only because and only when they're created by everyone. I think that we have, for too long, outsourced the notion of what building a city is to professionals, to people who, politicians and others who we expected to take care and do things for us. At the end of the day, we have to take these systems and flip them on their head and get back to a position where we are co-creating our places together, not outsourcing it to someone else. this is the way that we're not only going to rebuild our balance sheets and make our city strong and successful, but it's also the way that as we go through this transition from this kind of failed suburban experiment to something that is a facsimile of a traditional development pattern, that we will start to recreate the communities that really bound our places together. It's an honor to be here tonight. Thank you so much. Just one little brief thing, and then we'll get to your question. If you are interested in what we do, strongtowns.org, this whole thing started as a blog. It is now, I will go so far as to say, an international movement, because today they're changing our stuff into French, and just bizarre things are happening. We publish 3 articles a day. We do 3 podcasts a week, do a lot of videos, a lot of things. What we're trying to do is share a message. If you are inspired by what we are doing, the thing we ask you to do is to share it with somebody else. Take something we have put together and in your own words, share it with someone around you. If you are very interested in what we're doing, if you really want to support us, we have over 2,500 members, people who give us $5, $10 to help us go out and do things like this. If you want to be one of those people, we would be honored. And the third thing that we ask, if you're really, really inspired by us, is just start doing stuff. You know, this is your place. This is your town. Hack it. Be, you know, what we say is do what you can to build a strong town. So whatever you're capable of doing, go out and do that. Please, let me see if I can help with your question.
Okay. My question is constantly we hear about governments entering into agreements to do a project. It doesn't matter what project it is. And every time, initially, the public is advised that it's going to cost X number of dollars.
Right.
When the project is completed, it's now double X.
Right.
Why?
There's
if you have a contract, that's supposed to be an agreement.
Yeah. There's simple reasons for that, and there's like deeply technical reasons for that. To spare us all like the deeply technical reasons, because contracts are never written. It's not like you go in and get an oil change and it's $16.95, and then, you know, all of a sudden it's $200. It's contracts are written generally like per unit. I'll give you. This is esoteric. When I was undergrad, I had an internship for one summer with the Department of Transportation, and I learned pretty quickly. I actually got an award for this project I worked on because I was a jerk. I actually tricked the contractor. So, if you're paving a road, and the road calls for 2 inches of pavement, if you could put on 2 1/8 inches over, 70 miles of road, do you know how much more pavement that 1/8 of an inch is a bizarre amount of asphalt. It's a bizarre amount of bituminous. And we pay, as a state, we pay bituminous by the ton. So my job as like the lowly intern inspector was to make sure that they were putting on the right amount. How do you tell? These guys are like making huge amounts of money. They've got millions of dollars literally at stake. And it's me, a $12 an hour intern or whatever, $8 an hour or whatever I was getting. Intern, I'm supposed to stop this juggernaut. You look at it and you figured out what they did is they bid everything really low and they bid the bituminous really high, and then they would overrun the heck out of it. And I figured this out like right away. So what I did is the guy who was working for them wasn't very good with the calculator, and I was. So I had a programmable calculator. So I just programmed it to give the answer for what's called the yield and then deduct 30 points off of it. So as he was going on, it always looked like he was over. And then he actually wasn't, he was right on. This is, anytime you're doing big projects like this, they come in like net like that, there's a whole like system to game them. It is the nature of a big project. And I wish I could, you know, we could do like days and days and days about this. It is like the accepted way to do things. I was, for some reason in my mind, because I just had the opportunity to go with my oldest daughter to Disneyland. And it's like, you pay $100, $110 to get in, which is like an incredible amount of money. And then you get in and, you know, she likes it, but then you go through like the Pirates ride and you get off, and then there's all the like pirate stuff. And then you go out and then they got the other thing, and then you go on the other ride and there's the other stuff. And it's like, well, I just walked in spending $220 and I wound up spending $600. Like how did that happen? Because that's the way the park is designed. It's designed to like get as much money out of you as you can. Those contracts are designed to work that way.
But essentially, then, I think in the contract negotiation, there should be better terms and conditions that will prohibit that from happening.
You can do that. I think I get what you're getting at. You're feeling cheated.
Yes.
And what I'm telling you is that I wasn't cheated at Disneyland. I actually got what I paid for. I was just conned into paying what I wasn't expecting to pay. When you write contracts like that, because they do have like lump sum contracts, what happens is then the contract is just like 50% higher. So you say, here's a per unit contract, and go ahead and bid this, knowing that you can cheat it and work it and make it work. Or do the whole thing for a lump sum, and even more, do it for a lump sum and then guarantee it for 5 years or 10 years. And what you'll see is that you just get a higher bid price, is what you'll get. You're feeling cheated, and you're really just kind of being whiplashed by the process, not ultimately someone's cheating you.
Maybe a higher initial at the outset of the
Yeah.
contract.
But let's say you have a $1 million project and it ends up costing you $2 million at the end. What you would do is just do a lump sum project. You would just get a $2 million bid. That's what I'm saying. So it's the art of bidding is an art, not a science. And it will, if you get into it, it will not make you feel happy inside. Please.
So one of the things I've noticed in Baltimore that seems to be in vogue is that people feel like, well, there's a corner store I don't like, or there's certain types of hair salons I've heard people don't like. I've heard we don't want a 7-Eleven. I mean, there's any number of businesses that get attacked here. And people have this, it seems, this notion that if you can push those out, that somebody's going to want to come in behind that.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that notion, or?
You mean if you don't allow the 7-Eleven, that you'll get a...
Or you get it closed. You don't like the hair salons, and you just put restraints on them and regulate them, and then have people come and inspect them 7 times a day, and then eventually they just sort of quit the neighborhood, and you end up with an empty storefront now where, you know, because people believe if I can get rid of those businesses that we just don't like, for whatever reason, that once the street is sort of... So my question is that if I said I think in Baltimore there's something that's in vogue where people feel like if there's certain businesses or of certain types in neighborhoods and they can sort of flush them out, that something better, more pristine, you know, a yoga studio with poodle grooming and wheatgrass Slurpees will come in.
So let me ask this, is this like, we don't like the tattoo parlor, but we would like this? Because that's what, in my hometown, it's like, tattoo parlor is like you hit the bottom.
Right, so yeah.
Right? Like, and if we just don't allow tattoo parlors, we'll get yoga studios.
Well, here it's bail bonds and corner stores.
Right.
And,
That's crazy. That doesn't, it doesn't work that way. No, it doesn't work that way. And let me give you this in a different, let me answer this in a different way, because I've been jonesing on this notion for a while. We have this thing in my hometown where I have people who will look at the neighborhood that we were just looking at, which is not our poorest neighborhood in town. We have another one I think that would be classified as poor. But they'll look at both of those neighborhoods and they'll say, those people there don't have pride of place. They don't have pride of ownership. They're all renters. They're somehow like lesser people. They don't maintain their yards. They don't keep their houses nice. They don't da-da-da-da-da. There's a whole like litany of things. And along with that comes the, tattoo parlors and pawn shops and this kind of thing. That's just like bad. And we associate it with the people that are there. Like the people that are there are somehow deficient. If you were going to make an investment and you knew that you were going to lose money on it, would you make that investment? If you had a little bit of savings you scraped together and you could put $1,000 into something, but you knew next year that that $1,000 would be worth $900, and the year after that $800, and the year after that $500, would you do that? You can't get the money back, it's a permanent investment. No, you wouldn't. You'd be silly to do it. And so we look at neighborhoods that are in structural decline, where the city's not maintaining the streets and the sidewalks, the parks are overgrown with weeds, the trees need to be trimming, we're not putting the trees back in the boulevard, nobody gives a damn about how you get to the store, all that stuff. Who in their right mind living in that neighborhood would invest in it? Who in that right mind would take money out of their pocket and say, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna repaint my house. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna put an addition on the back. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna spend my Saturday, my one day off a week mowing the yard. I don't find that crazy. I would find it crazy if they did that. We have walked away from these neighborhoods, and we look and say that the people who live in these neighborhoods, well, they don't seem to have pride of place. No, when you put the big box store right on the edge of the neighborhood and have its, we're in a church, I won't say this. When you have its rear end face the neighborhood with all the dumpsters and loading docks, you're basically just mooting the neighborhood all day. Like, I don't care about you. Why then do you look at that neighborhood and say, why don't you people care? Like, I don't get that. I don't understand that. And so to me, I think we are overly simplistic when we look and say, like, I don't like X shop, ban that, or don't allow that there, and then Y shop that I do like will magically come in. No. The way you get from X to Y is you have to bring the neighborhood up. You have to incrementally improve it. It's got to change and evolve to become a better place. And you have to do it in such a way that you bring the neighborhood with you. That's like the key. So I think that premise is wrong fundamentally. And I think you should push back on it.
We are.
I'm sorry, please.
So how can we make this paradigm shift from these giant projects that inevitably saddle future generations with debt to these very small scale projects that I think require a lot of creativity and imagination and a lot more work. And I think, like, honestly, a lot of the people who are some people who are going to be in charge of this stuff, they're not used to working that way.
Right.
They don't have a people necessarily.
I think the question becomes who's the we. I think if we is like the people in this room who don't necessarily hold power, how would we do that? I think we can start. I think there's two sides of this. I think on our half, we have to become more tolerant of failure. So a lot of venture capital is doing things that are small that don't work, right? And if we're going to demand that every single thing that the city of Baltimore does is perfect, then forget this. You're going to get dumb projects forever that will fail big, right? But they'll fail in a way where nobody's really accountable. We have to create for ourselves a culture tolerant of low-level mistakes. I think we can start nurturing that too by pushing some of those boundaries ourselves, by doing a Memphis and going out and doing some of these things, by communicating to elected officials what our 8 projects would be in our neighborhood. I'm about to lose all my juice, so I'm just going to shut this up. I think cities that have been really successful along this route, and I don't want to be too much of a nativist, I'll point out Minneapolis just because I think they've done this thing well. Minneapolis has seeded neighborhood groups, and not seeded as in like NIMBY groups, but they've gone out and they've said, help us identify these small projects, these little things that need to be done. And the city actually staffs like a liaison to every neighborhood group, not to go out and say, tell us why you oppose this project, or tell us why you don't want this or that to happen. But tell us what these little things are that are, you know, bothering you in the neighborhood that we can go out and address. But for you sitting here, I think that you have to start a dialogue in your neighborhoods about what your expectations are. If the city tried to do that sewer project again, the people, before it was just me opposing it, there would be 50 people opposing it today. If the city went out and tried to do the 8 projects in the neighborhood, before there would be like nobody who really cared, there'd be a handful of us. Now there'd be 100 people who would like that. I think that those are the numbers you got to push on, right? Move things in that direction. Please, you had something?
Yeah, hi. I'm wondering, first of all, thanks for coming to Baltimore. I've followed the Baltimore.
Thank you.
And the map that you showed of Lafayette that you said you've done of other cities, and that it's a matchup of a number of other maps that you do, is redlining, or the original redline maps included in that?
We just looked at, well, we just looked at the finances. We just looked at today at like where, we weren't doing like maps of demographics or anything like that. We were just looking at like the hard, cold numbers. Where's the money coming from? Where are we spending the money? That's all we looked at. So there.
Have you set them against the redline maps? So I'm wondering if there would be interesting points of overlap. Do you follow what I'm asking?
No, I totally know what you're saying. I think the short answer is no. I think a longer answer would be, that would be very interesting to look at. I kind of think it would be, in many ways, predictable, thus, like, less interesting in my brain. I'm kind of one of these people who's like, what's the curious thing we can dig into? Here's a very interesting thing about Lafayette. I often get people ask me, like, why is that poor neighborhood profitable? When you look at it, yes, the streets are narrow, the blocks are tight. When you go out to the edge, what you see is you know, a 150-foot wide lot with a wide house. And when you go to that neighborhood, you'll see a 150-foot deep lot with a narrow house. Just think about this as an engineer for a second. Narrow house, a little bit of infrastructure per building. Wide house, wide lot, a lot of infrastructure per building. So it's the same, you know, it's a different way of cutting something up. But here's like one interesting thing to think about. If you were the first people to build in Lafayette, Louisiana, Lafayette is a swamp. Where would you have built?
Higher ground.
You built on the high ground, yeah. You didn't build in the swamp, you built on the high ground. The interesting thing about high ground is that everything drains off of there. So if you live in this neighborhood, which happens to be the poorest neighborhood, and you take a shower or, you know, what have you, the sewage coming out of your house flows by gravity down to the sewage treatment facility. If you live way out here in the swamp that's been drained, now you have all those ongoing drainage costs and everything, but when the sewage flows out of your place, it flows into a lift station and is lifted, 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 lifted. We found a place where they had 22 different lift stations to get to the treatment facility. They both pay the same bill because they're both one connection. Okay? Does that make any sense? No. But that's the system that they have in place. So there's an incentive to live way out here and like slough your costs off on everybody else. Now we can go through like multiple phases of that. That's the sewer system, the water system, the drainage system, the transit, like they all have like these kind of things to them. So when we say like poor neighborhoods pay, they are like literally, they're not costing that much and they pay a ton. There may be, you know, I guess I haven't looked at like some specific redlining maps with that, but Please.
Just to finish that off, like, I guess one of the things that came to my mind when you mentioned that the poor neighborhood subsidized rich, like, is that also kind of like, I guess I believe it in principle, but is that also slightly because of like systematic disinvestment that we're putting less in than we should, because we're not fixing
No, because I'm glad you asked that. Yeah, because I get that question sometimes. Is that because we're not investing in the poor neighborhoods? No. Our map assumed this is what the cost would be to maintain this every year. So our map assumed that the map I showed you, that assumed that we went out and maintained everything like we're supposed to. We're not. So it's even worse, right? Yeah. Please.
A related question. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
A related question on that. You've talked about the advantage of collecting people together as opposed to spreading them out. Certainly financially, many of our neighborhoods and sort of the tenements, the 1900s and whatnot, suffer from the overcrowding aspect. I'm wondering how you find and describe that sweet spot, because it is possible that those neighborhoods that are so tight together that you're talking about, part of what helps keep them poor and disenfranchised is that overcrowding. So where is that sweet spot and how does one define and find it? Oh, okay.
No, but it's, I'll repeat the question, and I'm going to have to like gently push back on your premise. The question was, what's the sweet spot when we have cities that were overcrowded, that didn't work, and now we have cities where everything's too spread out, that's not working. What's like the magic number? No. Yeah, and I think it's okay. So we can go to a city like Hong Kong or Singapore, which are like ridiculously dense, like so dense that it is absolutely suffocating. For me, Manhattan is just oppressive. Like I spend a day in Manhattan and I just, like I have to go scream somewhere because it just, my best friend lives there. He can't get enough of it. He thinks it's fantastic. He flew out and went to Shanghai. And he said, Chuck, for the first time in my life, I understood you. Because it was like a different scale, right? So when we look at the historical narrative we have about cities is that they were congested and blighted and nasty, and so we spread them out. And that's a very like American narrative. If we go to European cities, even ones that were decimated, Dresden, even ones that were completely blown out during World War II, they went back and rebuilt them. And they rebuilt them at like densities that were way higher than what we built. Part of what was going on in the 1920s, as the automobile was starting to come into its own, and we were trying to figure out what to do, was this City Beautiful movement and kind of all the related ideas around that. And what that really tried to do was to say, let's take the problems of the city that have been problems of the city forever. I mean, you can go back and read Thomas Jefferson, and he said, cities are the most rotten, scum, horrible places. There's, disease and pestilence. Like, cities have always been these places of give and take and struggle. And the City Beautiful movement was to say, we're becoming affluent, we're becoming wealthy. Let's use our wealth to fix the historic problems of the city. Let's run sewer and water through here. Let's get rid of horses and not have sewage in the streets. Let's put in beautiful statues and fountains, and let's open up certain congested areas to let light and air in. And then we hit the Depression, and then we hit World War II, and then we said, forget that. We're just going to spread everything out. So I think that there isn't a magic number. I don't think that, I think what humanity has shown is that we can build great places at all kinds of levels of density and congestion. We can also build really despotic places at all levels of density and congestion. And I don't think that there is like a right number. I think that there is a balance, but it's a balance based more on the community there, not the scale or the density number. Is that probably a dissatisfying answer?
I was hoping for something a little more theoretically, and just we're dealing with both of those issues, with density and with spread right now. So I was looking for things, but I thank you. That was fine. Thank you very much.
I think if you're dealing with those, I think you're dealing with the wrong. I think you're dealing with abstract numbers as opposed to things that actually matter. My opinion. Please, sorry you.
I was just wondering if you had any anecdotes about what other communities might have done with methadone clinics?
Yeah, we have a few. That the neighborhood that we're working in has one. It is really interesting because I think I'm gonna say something that I don't think is universal, so don't take it as universal. But in the neighborhood that I was in, that neighborhood, the closer you got to the methadone clinic, the less problems you had with it.
The what?
The fewer problems you had with it.
With what?
The methadone clinic.
The closer you got to it?
Mhm. And the reason was, for this particular one, now we have another one on the south side of town that is really bad and it's drawn. There's a great book, and I'm actually interviewing the guy for my podcast on Monday, Sam Quinones, who wrote Dreamland. Yeah, fantastic. And he talks about this effect where, like, the dealers will go to the methadone clinics and, like, sell outside of that. We have one on the south side of town that is that. On the north side, northeast, where the neighborhood I was working in, that one is in an area where, for lack of a better word, there's like a Mother Teresa type who runs like the clinic in the area and like chases out people who shouldn't be there. And it's like a tight little group, and it works really well.
Well, I just want to add.
Yeah.
I think there's maybe 12 blocks around here.
Yeah.
So people from Monday through Friday, lots of people come here and hang out all day. And
Right.
And it's turned our corners into very desirable,
Yeah.
profitable.
It's a great market, right? You've got a captured market. I wish I knew how to answer that.
Yeah, no, just very.
Yeah, I don't have any good stories or anecdotes.
Can I interject? I just want to say, I think that our problem in Old Goucher is that, unfortunately, like, it's just the concentration of how it's not just one clinic or two clinics, it's, several. And it's interesting because it's not very beneficial to the people using them, because the idea of why so many of them are concentrated here is, it's the center of the city. But it means that people living on the further edges then are all coming here, and they're not spread out. And like, I look at development projects as a planner, and every time one comes in I've only really looked at like one, but that interestingly, unsurprisingly, it was a clinic that was in Cherry Hill where there were already a bunch of other clinics. And I think it's more of this idea that they keep getting concentrated in our neighborhood and other certain neighborhoods because of opposition from other communities that say, we don't even want one. They already have some. Why can't you just put them there?
There's a great, Ken Burns did a documentary on the Prohibition. And in terms of like watching, it's not my favorite Ken Burns documentary. I found it kind of boring, sorry Ken Burns. But there were a couple of like really fascinating insights that I didn't grasp until I watched this. And the first one was how closely linked Prohibition was towards women's suffrage, and how closely those two were linked. And the idea was, we didn't have clean water. People drank alcohol because, like, literally it was safe to drink where water wasn't. Men would get drunk. They would come home. They would beat their wives. And the police report would say he was caught with the spirit. He was taken by the spirit. It was a get out of jail free card. And Prohibition was basically a way to fight assault in an age before you could fight assault, an age before you had suffrage. So the two are very linked. Prohibition went away after we had women's suffrage because it changed the power dynamic. I'm one of these, and I think that if you accuse me of being either naive or idealistic, I think that those would be fair assessments. There's a part of me that does look at the way we have arranged ourselves on the landscape. So isolated from each other, with daily routines that don't bring us into contact, not only with people we love and respect, but with buildings that inspire. And I live 5 blocks away from my church, and I actually walk by it every day. And there is something powerful about just taking a moment every day and realizing how small you are. The idealistic part of me says that if we could start to mend our communities again, build these places back, connect the fabric that's broken, it becomes more than a budget thing. It becomes a whole community thing. And I don't think that solves our methadone clinic problem. I don't think that solves our drug problem. I don't think prohibition solves our, assault problem. But I think it gets us closer. It gets us in a framework where we can start to deal with it. I know we're out of time.
Well, I want to ask if the councilman has any thoughts or questions.
Philip?
Yeah.
Okay. I was working on it all night, and it just came to me. Philip, it's so nice to see you. Please, I'm sorry.
No, I guess if I was to ask a question, it was more related to, I guess when you showed the 3 images that show how that particular stretch grew from, I guess you're describing it as stalls all the way to a more developed corridor. And seeing the potential in investing in those communities that exist now, kind of like a stall.
Right.
So, but what happens if investment does come and now the values increase,
Right.
and then the individuals who are the legacy residents of those areas now are either displaced or now aren't able to remain in that community that, what for better or for worse, was their home. And what types of and it's not something that we can do after development comes.
Right.
What measures do we, and we probably don't have enough time, but I mean, there's got to be some measures that we put in place, policies that we put in place before the investment to protect those residents, or we'll never be able to.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I think there's a simple answer to that, and it has complex implications to it. The simple answer is that the people who live in the neighborhood have to share in the ownership, so they're part of that rise. When we look at that little shack out on the edge of town, and we think about it over a generation becoming something else, what you're looking at internally is you're looking at someone who had like a little something to start with. And it wasn't much, but they owned it. And when the value increased, the success of their front business would increase. They could build a second story, rent it out. In other words, they were participating in that wealth creation. It wasn't wealth creation that got rid of them and brought someone else in who was wealthier. It was an act of them building the wealth and them getting the benefit of that. What we have done and what we have structured, and a lot of this is the way we have centralized capital. The way that if you want money to do something, you're actually getting money from Wall Street, which is a real messed up way to do it. There's people pushing back on that. There's local kind of investment mechanisms where we can keep money here locally and invest in each other. But the idea is that we don't want the $5 million from Wall Street to come in and invest in our neighborhood, and then we'll make them rent 3 of the places to poor people. What we want is we want the capital we have here to stay here, to churn around in our community, to make you wealthy and you wealthy and you wealthy and you wealthy, and have you be able to build your places up so that in a generation you have something. And then if you leave and someone else, you know, comes in, you're leaving wealthy. You're leaving better off than when you were here. And you're doing it voluntarily. That's a different structure than what we have now. And so I think that's an easy answer with a complex set of like things we would do to implement it. But I feel like that's the direction we need to go. If we don't come up with ways for people to own, it's the idea of an ownership society has been bastardized. Because the idea of an ownership society in America today is you go get a huge loan, go into big debt, and then make your payments to Wall Street for the next 3 decades. That's what ownership society is. And that's not the American version of ownership society. If we go back and we look at how this country was built, it was built where people could start with nothing in a place, and then by their own efforts and work, build that place up to something and have that something. Pass that on, keep that, sell it, move on. And I realize that is an idealistic like rendition of the past, but my gosh, I was in Pompeii, the ruins of Pompeii, 20 years ago, and there in the ruins of Pompeii is the storefront, is a little tiny building. And you could picture the wife like keeping an eye on 2 kids in the back while she sold stuff out the front, while the husband was out working in the field. You've got diversity of income. You've got lower expenses for childcare. You've got like all the things in one place that is like the traditional way of building a city. Traditional ways of building a city are meant for poor people to start with nothing and end up with something. And I think if we can get back to that like essence, that term ownership society can mean something again. Mean something more than debt. Mean something more than like indentured servitude. We are out of time, and you're holding up something meaningful. Is that for me? Thank you. I have to go to a meetup. Do you know where our meetup is?
Yeah, it's right on the street. My staff, when we're traveling like this, we want to get together with people less formally. So I am walking over to Clavel. That's right. Which is like 3 blocks that way? That's right. On, for those of you who don't know, 23rd and Howard. It's right on the west side of Howard Street. And hopefully my friend Skylar will come. Yes? And my friend Philip will come. And any new friends here who want to come here, more than invited. So thank you for sharing your evening with me and your beautiful place and your neighborhood. I really am thankful. What are we doing tomorrow? Are we doing something tomorrow? Yeah, we're having a little walk around the neighborhood. So I and a few others are going to show Chuck, you know, what's going on here in Old Goucher, some of the things that we've been working on, and vision for the future for the neighborhood. Good deal. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.